So tell me what brought you back to Baylor. You graduated. You left town.
I graduated and I went to work. The first I got a job on a magazine put up by the American Baptist Convention in New York City, and I spent from one spring to the next fall, and I went to NYU. I thought I was going to get a degree at NYU. Went to graduate school at NYU for a year, and then went to Columbia University to the Graduate School of Journalism at Columbia, and went there. And during that time, I didn't work. Well, I worked, but I worked on weekends at a fleet carrier corporation, not in journalism. And then when I got out, I came to Houston and worked at the Houston Post. A great experience. It was the election year, and among other things, I helped cover the 1960 election. I wrote stories on both. I wrote stories on Nixon and others, and Jack Valenti was handled the Johnson campaign. I got to know him pretty well, and I met Ted Kennedy. When Kennedy came to speak in the famous speech at Rice Hotel about the relationship of church and state, they brought in the heavy guns from Washington to actually cover it. But I ended up going. Another guy and I, we would go listen to some of the speech and go back out in the lobby and talk to the rewrite man about and say what he had said so far. But I didn't get a byline on that particular story. But I did see both Kennedy and Nixon, and that was in 60 to 61, and I was really having a great time. Things were going great, and a friend of mine by the name of Grover Andrews was the public relations director at Baylor. In the period before I ended up working full-time at the newspaper while I was schooling, I worked with Grover, for Grover. And so out of the clear blue, he called me and said that there was an opening in journalism. Would I be interested? And I told him no. And he said, well, Abner McCall is coming to Houston. Abner was the Baylor representative on the Southwestern Conference Athletic Committee, to a meeting at the Shamrock Hotel, which, by the way, is within walking distance of where we are now, and that he wanted to meet with me. So I went to the meeting. It was almost exactly this time of year. I would say probably May of 1961, and so what had happened is the previous year, Bill Moyers had agreed to come teach. Moyers had gone to Texas, had gone to North Texas, and then had gone to Southwestern Seminary and was handling the PR and everything for Southwestern Seminary while he was in school there. Still young. He's my age. And but he had actually, I think probably through Grover, he had agreed to come teach the year in 1960, in the fall of 60. Well, he went with Johnson to Los Angeles to the Democratic National Convention, and when Johnson was nominated as vice president, Bill went with him on the campaign trail. So he ended up calling Abner McCall in August before school started and said he wasn't going to be able to make it. Sherry Boyd Castello, one of my best friends ever, former editor of the Baylor Line, filled in for a year. And they kind of thought, I think they kind of left it open. There wasn't for sure that Johnson and Kennedy were going to be elected, so they kind of left the job open, and so the next year comes around in '61, and there's no chance that Bill is going to come, and so I go to breakfast at the Pancake House across from the Rice Hotel, within walking distance of where we're living today, and I essentially told Abner McCall that I wasn't interested, and he tried to talk me into it, which is funny. He told me a great story. He said, well, he had been working in the FBI. He worked in the FBI during World War II for 5 years. He said he did the same thing over and over for 5 years. He said, I was telling him I'd only been working at the Post for a year, and so it's too early to move. And he suggested I go to Austin and talk to Dave Chevins. Mr. Chevins was the AP bureau chief in Austin, and for 20-something years. And he had agreed to come in semi-retirement to Baylor to be the PR director and teach journalism. And so I went up to Austin again and met him, and we got along just fine. And he suggested I go to talk to Fred Hartman. Mr. Hartman was the editor and publisher in Baytown. So sometime about June, I went to Baytown and had lunch with Bill Hartman, who was working that summer, and Bill was the editor-elect of the Baylor Lariat. One of the job that they had at Baylor was teach journalism and be head of student publications. They'd never had anybody who was just in charge of all the publications and act as an advisor to the Lariat, and so this was going to be a new job. And so I met Bill. I was 20 when I first met him. Let's see, I was 27 and he was 20. I think that's right. We're still best friends. He's one of my best friends. We're going to have lunch Friday. We have lunch once a month. So eventually when I get to Baylor, he's the editor and I'm the advisor, and there's about 7 years difference in our age. So eventually I said, well, I'll come up for a year. I'll try it for a year. And I actually came back to the Post at the end of the year and talked to them about what to do, and the space program was just getting started, and they offered me the job of being the space reporter. And I liked the students so much that I'd had that year at Baylor that I just thought, well, I'll stay a little bit longer. And so I ended up staying. I stayed at Baylor 13 years, and in all 54 years before I don't know whether you know this or not, but I should clarify. During much of the time I taught at Baylor, I also worked at the Waco News Tribune. I worked there from late '61 until '70. I worked for about 9 years, and I did a little bit of everything. I was the night city editor for a whole year. I was the news editor, the person that puts the paper out on a day or two a week, and once all summer. I was there. I did the front page when the moon landing occurred, so I was doing this while I was teaching. So that was one of the reasons I probably decided not to come back to the Post, is because I was having a good time working at the Waco News Tribune with people I knew well and had worked for. I'd covered Friday night football for 10 years. I did sidebars on Baylor, primarily on Baylor, for the same period of time. I'd in other words, go to the dressing rooms and talk to the players after the games. I did that for about 10 years too. So that was all while I was teaching. So that was what explained a little bit about why I stayed and everything. But I really enjoyed the students and was kind of learning how to teach a little bit.